Thank you everyone for staying with us. We're beginning our discussion this morning quickly with one of two guests. I'm still expecting Reverend David Golow, the Executive Director of Need, to join us on the program this morning. In the meantime, I want to bring in someone with whom we've discussed issues of budgets and finance in this country, issues around corruption, issues that have to do with even things as fundamental as poverty, for example. We're bringing him all the way from Dubai, the United Arab Emirates, Dr. Kennedy Modugu, Assistant Professor of Accounting and Finance. Thank you for joining us on TMI here on ITV.
Thank you very much for having me. Good morning, viewers.
Great. I want us to start looking at this discussion from the angle of institutional thinking. A lot of persons have said until we are able to strengthen institution, there's next to nothing we can accomplish in terms of not just the fights against corruption, but the recovery and management of assets thereof. What have been your thoughts?
Well, thank you very much for your question. And I think my position on that has been very vehement, and it remains very immutable, to the extent that until we strengthen our institutions, all our efforts towards curbing the systemic corruption in Nigeria will remain a mirage. Now, I give you a typical example. I live in a country, for instance, where I don't know who heads the central bank. I don't know who heads the police. But the names of these institutions ring bell. All right. So when I see, for example, the convoy of Dubai police, I need not, as it were, know who is in charge, who is the headsman, who still pretends over it. I know that I need to abide by the laws of the country. So in Nigeria, like other commentators have remarked in the past, we only have big men. In other words, strong men. We don't have strong institutions. And I stand to be corrected. No country, I repeat, no country can have sustainable development where the institutions are weak. So, now, back to your question once again. The truth is, until and unless we have these reforms in our institutions, not just reforms by the word reforms, just connotation, but we have to look at it from a holistic perspective, looking at it from our own moral rearmament, because these institutions don't run themselves. People are behind the institutions. So until we have a national reorientation, until we have a national rebirth, that every Nigerian must own it. It is not the government alone. Truth be told, yes, we are quick to cast aspersions. Now, the question I've always asked is this: where do the people who govern us come from? They come from amongst the people. So even if you appoint one individual today and you call him the president or the man in charge of a particular, establishment of government, if that person by himself does not live up to expectation as in regards to ethics, and morals, definitely it will remain an exercise in futility. So the big thing is this: we must strengthen our institutions so that whoever is there would live according to the dictates of that institution. For instance, even if you look at a place like the United States of America, now even if you bring a criminal, in quotes, to come and head the FBI, a criminal heading the FBI, once he gets there, the criminal nature dies off. Why? Because the institutions will throw him out if he does not live up to expectation. But what happens in Nigeria? When you appoint an individual, now he begins to receive phone calls. Guys, it is our time to chop, in quotes. So you have pressure from family members, pressure from friends, associations here and there. Now a man did there kind of thinking. Then the person begins to dance according to the tune of the music played by the henchmen. So by and large, what are we talking about? Until we strengthen our institutions, which is not just the duty of the government, but the duty of every Nigerian, we are not there yet.
We have people now who are saying, yes, we've been fighting corruption for quite some time, but we cannot account for the most part for the recoveries that we have made in these fights. And we're hearing that's what has informed the need to come up with this process of crime recovery and management agency, which some persons have argued that it's a more effective and institutional way to approach the issue of recovery and management of assets. Because the argument has always been that while we are fighting corruption, we must also be able to account in specific terms for all of the recoveries that we are making. Do you think agency of these sorts, basically saddled with the responsibility of recovering and managing assets or proceeds of crime, is coming at such a time you consider very critical?
Well, thank you once again. I think to answer your question in categorical terms, it's a no from me. Now, what are the reasons? You see, year in, year out, we are being inundated with proliferation of government agencies, institutions, etc. Again, that also translates into the burgeoning cost of governance we are talking about. You cannot appropriate and reprobate at the same time. And I was reading the news, a couple of days ago when, the president was receiving some applause, the office of the Attorney General, who is trying to send a bill to the National Assembly on how we can have a special agency to manage process of corruption. That alone in itself, internationally speaking, gives us a very bad image. I really don't know how people just sit down, in the comfort of their offices, craft certain things that they think, will garner some applause. Rather, it's a shame. It's a shame. Even if we have such an agency, we can just create a department from amongst the existing agencies. We have EFCC there, and experts have told us that even in EFCC, in the Nigerian Police Force, we have an arm that is responsible for anti-corruption. We have EFCC, we have ICPC, we have all the CCs. And now you want to create another commission with its attendant cost of governance, wherein people will have official card, you have SA, SSA, PA to the SSA. Come on, we can't. We're a laughing stock, to be honest. You can do these things quietly. I'm not surprised because you live in a country where, for instance, when a governor pays salaries, it becomes a campaign item. It's so shameful. It's as good as saying that when you walk into a mall and you pick a bar of soap, you pay for it. That is what you are paid for. It's as good as saying that you pay for that bar of soap and you are not given. That is what you are saying. When people, get their salaries paid, it's as though we have done them some good. Back to the issue. The fact remains, in this time and age, when people are talking about robotic process automation, RPA, some of these things can be automated. I can tell you that you can have an app, just a simple app. EFCC can just design an app that will monitor proceeds, that have been recovered from looters, assets in terms of cash, in terms of physical assets, whatever it is, anywhere in the world, it can be tracked with a mobile device. Why are we always, making rocket science out of very simple things? The world has been made simple. Artificial intelligence is there. Now, I'm talking to you from the UAE, and we're in Nigeria, and we're having a very robust conversation. Why do we mystify things? Why are you creating agencies? For me, I think it's another way to create job for the boys. And at the end of the day, a government will wake up and compile a compendium and say, these are our achievements. We created an agency whose responsibility was the recoveries and management of process of crime, telling us that Nigerians are criminals. So, come on. We are aware, as we speak, that the so-called agency that was established primarily to manage or to recover those loots, the man at the helm of affairs is being investigated for relooting what has been supposedly recovered. And Nigerians are asking questions. Who is fooling who? I think it is not about agency proliferation. It is not about building strong men. It's about strengthening. I give you a typical example. Look at the just completed Edo State election. For the first time in recent times in the history of Nigeria police, Nigerians are commending them. Why? Because prior to the election, one of the fundamental problems that was observed was that Nigerian police have not been sufficiently funded. We are quick to dismiss Nigerian police force. They are the best brains, some of the best brains in the world. You cannot make me hungry and you expect me to deliver optimally. It doesn't work. You know, in the Latin phrase, nemo dat non habet. I have not been weatherized. I have not been mobilized. And you are sending me to the war front. It doesn't work. I'm not motivated. Now, we saw how they were able to foil every form of attack, how they were able to, recover ballot boxes that were snatched from mobs. This was because the police didn't compromise. Why? Because they had their package. So if you strengthen the existing institutions, train and retrain them, deploy the relevant technology in this age of AI, come on, you don't need an agency, you just need an app to manage whatever it is that has been recovered from looted funds.
Dr. Kennedy Modugu, I understand your schedule for this morning is tight, and then again there's the disparity in time zones between you and those of us on this end. I want to thank you specially for sharing your thoughts with us on this very topical issue regarding the fight against corruption in Nigeria and, of course, the recovery and management of assets. Ultimately, I'll be getting Reverend David Golow to interface his thoughts with your position on this matter. But in the meantime, thank you for coming through for us. We appreciate it.
You're most welcome. Thank you for having me.
Indeed.
Have a nice day.
Okay, we're taking a break at this point. I'm bringing in someone who has been part of this whole struggle in the fight against corruption, both home and abroad. That's coming up shortly. Stay with us.
I stay glued all day, listening to the independent radio. That's the Heartbeat station. No need to mention. Brand new from the package to the finest news. Information, education, entertainment, satisfaction.
Radio 92.3 FM. Independent.
Okay, quickly, let's bring in Reverend David Golow, Executive Director, African Network for Environment and Economic Justice. Reverend Golow, it's always a pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you very much.
I'll be talking with a certain Dr. Kennedy Modugu, who spent the last couple of minutes helping us to create a background as to the fight against corruption in Nigeria. And he says we do not need to have a proliferation of institutions. We just need to strengthen existing ones and then be able to have the courage and, of course, the strength of character to accomplish whatever it is we have set out as objectives in the fight against corruption. But of particular importance right now is the recovery and management of assets, which we have seen happen since 2004. As it stands right now, many Nigerians cannot put their finger on what exactly we have recovered, and then, of course, that gives room for speculation. Now we're hearing, maybe by way of trying to curb all that, the federal government is proposing already some proceeds of crime recovery and management agency. The word agency, I'm sure, is the source of concern for many Nigerians, because you already have agencies like the ICPC and the EFCC, and then, of course, in the middle of the police as well, you have one or two arms also saddled fundamentally with the responsibility of fighting corruption. Are we having a problem of alignment of priorities?
Again, thank you very much for inviting me to discuss this very important issue. I think there is confusion, and largely I would say the federal government is responsible for this confusion by not communicating very clearly to the public what is the purpose of this new agency that government intends to establish. Globally, the best practice is to put in place an independent agency to manage recovered assets. And what Nigeria have done by putting in place a framework through this bill that will be sent to the National Assembly, haven't been approved by the Federal Executive Council, is not a different issue. It is a good decision, particularly against the background that all asset that has been recovered so far from crime has not been properly put in proper use. We are all aware of the fact that the anti-corruption agency are structured, and it's not just Nigeria alone, to identify, trace, and recover asset. But they don't have the expertise to manage the asset. And that requires a professional agency to do. And Nigeria is not the only country that have taken this route by looking for a framework through designing an asset recovery architecture that will take into consideration the expertise of an agency. So an international organization like UNODC have again continued to invest in and strengthening the capacity of key countries around the world. So countries like Kenya, Brazil, they've all put in place this kind of agency. And so what is really the government decision to do this? For instance, the Anti-Corruption Agency, EFCC, ICPC, and other anti-corruption agencies in the country have recovered assets. But unfortunately, we haven't managed those assets very well. And if you look around EFCC office across the entire country, you will see cars, assets seized from corrupt people, and unfortunately, EFCC is not structured to have the capacity to manage those assets.
I want to interrupt you quickly. Did we miss that structural issue at the point where the act establishing the EFCC was being enacted?
No, there's not. You see, it's a different responsibility.
Altogether?
Altogether. And so EFCC is structured to identify, trace, investigate, and recover proceeds of crime. But the capacity to manage
assets
is a different thing entirely. And what the best practice, and I'm talking from the point of view as an expert on asset recovery, that is to put in place an agency that manages such an asset. And so what Nigerian government have done is to come up with a bill, which is the proceeds of crime bill, and that bill will back this agency. But what we have seen in the media is to confuse the public. Yes, I completely agree, and most of the people that have been discussing this current agency bill that the federal government is about to send to the National Assembly, they haven't seen the content and the provision of this bill. Now, yes, there are some provisions in this bill that look like duplicating the effort of the anti-corruption agency, particularly in the area of investigation. And that is something that can be put in the debate at the National Assembly. And if it is seen that it is duplicating, it can be removed. Because the bill is still a proposal from the executive arms of government that is going to the National Assembly. Until the National Assembly passes it and then signed by the president, it cannot be a law.
Right.
So what we have today is a proposal. And what I expect is that people should look the content of the bill with almost about 13 parts. And the key aspect of the bill that Nigerians must take notice of is about the management of those assets. And you and I agree that ICPC, EFCC, the way they are structured and the law that set them up, they're not structured to manage assets. They are structured to identify, trace, investigate, and recover proceeds of crime. But when it comes to the management, and we have seen that in the country, our recovered assets are wasting, and unfortunately it's been reluctant sometime until recently when the government decided to put in place a framework that at least there is some level of transparency and accountability. And this is not just coming from Nigeria. As a matter of fact, Nigeria have undergone the first and second review cycle of the review of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. And in each of these review process, gaps have been identified on the asset recovery regime in Nigeria, and best practice recommendation has come from those key circles that Nigeria have undergone. And in each of those recommendations, they've been always been call on Nigerian government to put in place the proceeds of crime bill. So, and this is not just Nigeria. It's applicable to all UN member states. And so, but what I think, and I've seen in the bill, that I think is a bit complicated, is some provisions in the bill that seems to be duplicating the effort of the existing traditional.
Which you said we can subject to a debate.
Exactly.
You have colleagues both home and abroad. I mean, you have followed issues of anti-corruption across the world. What are you hearing? What's the impression of the international community about our fight against graft?
First, one of the first way to do this analysis is about, again, looking how Nigeria perform in the Global Corruption Perception Index, the CPI, which is produced by the Transparency International annually. And if you look at the performance in the last 5 or 10 years, you agree with me that Nigeria have not really improved on some of the key indicators. And obviously, it's as a result of the level of corruption in the public sector. Because one thing that the CPI measure is the public sector corruption. It is not the private sector corruption. And because the petty corruption that we see day to day, all those are, we also have other indices that measure that. But let's just take CPI as an indicator to measure the Nigerian corruption and Nigerian performance in the corruption perception index. Nigeria have not performed very well. And you'll agree with me that, yes, the level of corruption in the public sector is huge, particularly in the areas of, for example, procurement. Government procurement is a huge area that attracts a lot of corruption tendency. And that is what has given Nigeria this image globally. And then when private sectors people come to Nigeria to do business, the opportunity to do things very quickly is not there. There are challenges. And so because of this has given Nigeria a very bad image internationally. And foreign investors are very careful where they take their money to. And they look into the index, the corruption perception index. It influences how private sectors moves with their money. And then there are other indexes like the World Governance Index produced by the World Bank. When you talk about the governance, you're talking about what is the perceptions of the governance framework in the country. It's also a key indicator that also guides the perceptions of the international community. If you also look at the World Governance Index produced by the World Bank, Nigeria is also not doing very well in that governance indicator. And that for us is something that builds this perception, and it begins to deepen how the international community perceived how the country is governed. And that are things that we need to really reflect on. And some of these indicators are produced by independent actors. And so how Nigerians respond to the result that comes from those indicators is very important. And this is what has actually influenced where we are today internationally.
There are fears. I mean, you already made allusion in passing to the issue of confusion, using your word now, coming from the federal government largely, which is, as it were, responsible for the haze that we have over this issue of process of crime bill that we're discussing right now. There's the belief, for the most part, that as against adopting institutional methods or approach towards fighting corruption, we've been more tilted in favor of excessive politicking. So there's that fear that because we have largely politicized the fight against corruption, the whole effort will not see light of day.
Yes. No, yes. Again, one of those things that anti-corruption experts also look at is the political will. You agree with me that the current government of Buhari was largely came into existence on the basis of the commitment of Buhari to fight corruption, to tackle corruption. And to a large extent, people even use the word, this body language. And once people feel that the government was not putting priority to tackling corruption, and the fight against corruption begin to take a low-key attention, that again lead to the political will going down. And what do we really mean by political will of tackling corruption? It is the capacity of those in leadership to put in place policies, program that again would not allow corruption to succeed. And when we talk about corruption in the public sector, we're talking about how government conducts their procurement activity. And once key people who are involved in corruptions, whether they are in the ruling party or in opposition party, what happens to them? And you've seen that people feel more comfortable to join the ruling party on the basis of the fact that if they are caught in corruptions and anything happens, nothing happens to them. And EFCC prosecution, if you look the statistics of those that are prosecuted, are they in the ruling party or are they in the opposition party? That is very important to put to recognize in coming out with an analysis whether the government is actually putting much political will in tackling corruption. But insofar taking this government, for instance, the Buhari regime, I will say that in doing analysis and assessment of their commitment in tackling corruption, in the areas of asset recovery, which is our main focus of discussion today, I've had the opportunity to have participated in a number of asset recovery that has happened in the country today. If you look the success Nigerian government have recorded, particularly in the Abacha 1, in the Abacha 2, in the Abacha 3, and now the Abacha 4, no country in the world have achieved that. No country. I repeat.
But is that rubbing off positively on Nigerians, ultimately?
Yes, I happens to be, I participated in the Abacha 2 negotiation process that led to the repatriation of $322.5 million to Nigeria. And after the Global Forum on Asset Recovery forum in Washington, which I also participated, that led to one of the successful repatriation of this money to Nigeria. The Nigerian government had an MOU with civil society, and we were privileged to be the one to have engaged the federal government. We're currently monitoring how this money is disbursed across the entire country. I can tell you with the evidence of what we have seen across the country, except from some few states who are not yet benefiting, the $322.5 million is being disbursed as a cash transfer program to poorest of the poor in the country. And the poor people are benefiting through the 5,000 naira cash transfer program that is going on across the country. The first time in the history of Nigeria, because who are the victim of corruption? It's the very poor people of the society. And Nigerian government, in the deal that they had with Switzerland government, they agreed that the money should be put into a social investment program through the cash transfer program. And ANEJ is facilitating a very broad civil society across the country, keeping an eye on how the money is moving from central bank through the NCTO down to the poor people across the country. That is a fantastic way, again, to strengthen the anti-corruption fight. Again, to define that tackling corruption is beneficial. And so the money going to these very poor people, again, has really helped to create hope and incentivize the fight against corruption in Nigeria. And I can tell you that internationally, the Nigerian government have attracted good reputation because they have been able to transfer the benefit of tackling corruption to the very poor in the society. Just to give you an example how this have incentivized the support internationally, Nigerian government have just again attracted another $311 million to Nigeria. And this is just the recent MOU between Nigeria and Irish government. And then we have also got another one, attract another one from Jersey government and the US government. That is the Abacha 3. And then the Abacha 4 is the one from the Irish, which is about $6.5 million. So you can see that if you compare Nigeria at the international platform level, particularly after the Global Forum on Asset Recovery Forum in Washington in 2017, we all participated in, I can't point to any country in the world, I'm talking as an expert, who have been reviewing the asset recovery regime globally. No country have been able to recover assets the way Nigeria have recovered. And now we're talking about Abacha 1, Abacha 2, Abacha 3, and Abacha 4. And we are not talking about Abacha 5. And now the question is that...
Will this Abacha series ever end, by the way?
Well, you know, essentially, Abacha stole a lot of money in Nigeria. We're talking about between $2 to $5 billion stashed around the world. And the recovery has been going on very successfully. And now in the Abacha 3 and the Abacha 2, which is the one that led to the repatriation of the $322.5 million, was a very successful case. And then the one between the US and the Jersey government that led to the repatriation of the $311 million that is going to be used for 3 major projects across the country. We're going to be using it in the second Niger Delta Bridge, Lagos Ibadan Road, and Abuja Kano Road. These are 3 major infrastructural projects that this money is going into. And we are also going to be monitoring whether this money is actually going to those projects in the country. Now, what is the importance of this in the asset recovery regime? It shows clearly that if you have a government that exercises the political will, that put in place an asset recovery regime that is transparent and accountable, the international community will cooperate. And when there is cooperation, there will be no hiding place for corrupt, politically exposed persons. And for us, this is the best way to tackle corruption globally. particularly when it is grand corruption. Because the way the money laundering system works in Nigeria is that the banks are complicit, and then the money moves from Nigeria to this offshore center, and when it gets to the offshore center, and except the cooperation of those jurisdictions, there is no way Nigerian government anti-corruption agency are able to recover this money.
You already talked about procurement, for
Yes.
example. I understand that one of the basic leaks or channels through which monies are siphoned out of this country is through procurement.
Yes, procurement.
We know we have the Procurement Act, for example,
Yes.
but I've spoken with experts like yourself and, of course, some brilliant lawyers who will tell you, look, the Procurement Act in this country doesn't bite. And what that means is as good as we do not have a Procurement Act here. Because you keep hearing about kickbacks and kickforth and so on and so forth. And we understand this is how governors now and in the past have been able to siphon so much of money out of this country. It goes to point to the fact that corruption in itself is systemic. How do we deal with a systemic problem from a superficial standpoint?
First again, just to respond to your question about the procurement system, you need a transparent system and an accountable framework. And the procurement law in Nigeria, I have also reviewed that procurement law. Look, it's solid. You see, it is the political will to implement the law and to identify where there are gaps and see how government address those gaps. What has happened in Nigeria is that the people of Nigeria, I give an example, for example, what is happening in NDDC. NDDC, the level of corruption in NDDC is mind-boggling. But if you look, now NDDC was established to help address the peculiar development challenge in the region. And one key challenge in the region is just moving from Benin now to Port Harcourt. It takes you more than 2 days now because
By
of the
road.
bad roads. Now, you ask yourself, why are the people of Niger Delta tolerant of the havoc that is happening in NDDC? Why do you think the governors are tolerant of what is happening in NDDC? You probably will say that, oh, NDDC is a federal government agency. You're right. But the question is that if you look, and we have analyzed the data, all the contracts given by NDDC, it is not foreigners that are getting the contract. It is the people from the Niger Delta, the companies that are getting the contract. They are not foreigners. It's Niger Delta people. The East-West Road, just moving between Edo and Warri, it takes you hours. Before now, 10 years ago, you can go to Warri, return back successfully. But you can't do it now. Now, what is the challenge? The challenge is that the stakeholders in the region do have responsibility. Even in the other climate like the US, Europe, where you have that some level, is that corruption happens there as well. But the difference is that the institutions work in those countries. But institutions will not work if the people are tolerant of corruption. In Nigeria here, the reason why people support government, they don't support government because government is delivering transparent governance. The basis of interpreting government performance is the amount of resources that accrue to individuals. And so what you have seen is that our people have allowed the system to perpetuate, and that's why the patron-client culture continues to grow. And the patron-client culture damages democracy, it damages accountable government. And so what you have seen in Edo, in Niger Delta and the entire country is that the procurement law are not working because the operators, the politically exposed persons, compromise the system. And unfortunately, these were all victims of the problem. And that is why we are all asking that one of the key ways to hold government accountable is to, first of all, put in place the right framework. And that's why I see the Proceed of Crime Bill as the right framework.
So it's timely.
It's timely, it is very useful, particularly against the COVID crisis. As I speak to you now, across the entire country, across the entire world, there's not enough finance to finance development. There's not enough resources. So in moving beyond the COVID crisis, government are looking for resources to finance development. And that's why tackling corruption is very important. Plugging the gaps of leaking finances is very important. But how you do this is very important. The framework you put in place is very important. So the procurement system you put in place is very important. And so, whatever the proceeds of crime that you recover, how you judiciously invest it sends the right signal, particularly when it is beyond your shore. In the case of international asset recovery framework, when asset is moving out of the country, for you to enjoy the cooperation of other jurisdictions, you must be seen to be a serious country that when the asset is recovered back, is used for a judicial.
Are we seen as being serious as a country?
Yes, like I said, I've said earlier on, when it comes to asset recovery,
corruption perception index.
Corruption perception index only measure one aspect of corruption.
It's not all encompassing.
No, you see, this is the ignorance. So when the media rise, each time CPI result is released to the public and say Nigeria is corrupt, yes, but we need to put in place some qualification that the corruption perception index is referring to is the public sector corruption. And every index that measure any particular development issue have a definition. And the particular corruption that Transparency International is measuring, particularly with CPI, is referring to the public sector corruption. And you know, the public sector corruption is a huge aspect. It is an aspect that when you capture, it tells you, at least it gives you a guide as to the situation of the country. An insight. And then don't also forget that it's a perception. Okay. There's a difference between perception and reality. The perception, you could be perceived to be corrupt.
But in reality, you're not.
You're not. The evidence, and that's why as an anti-corruption expert, there are other measures that deal with reality. For example, we're gathering just procurement data. It can tell you how corrupt the country is. For instance, just looking the website of state governments, what kind of information they put out there in the public. Are there information relating to how public spending data are put in the domain for the public to access? That could give you an indication. Right. When the government is designing a state budget, do they engage stakeholders to participate in how government allocate resources? That would give an indication about the budget transparency. So those are kind of indication. So the question is that the public do have a role to play, and how government put in place the right legal framework to strengthen anti-corruption fight is very important. And Nigeria is a classical case that reflects that. And then, you know, when people talk about Nigeria, the state governments are also involved, because the resources that is coming to this country is not just shared at the federal level. I also expect that as we are moving forward with the proceeds of crime bill at the national level, state government should begin to also be thinking about putting in place such a framework at the state level. And we are working with some few states in the region already on how to put a proceeds of crime bill at the state level, because stealing of public funds, contract not implemented, is going on at the state level. And so state government must put in place framework to tackle those challenges, because as we speak, there's a huge challenge after the post-COVID. I want to talk to you about that challenge and its enormity.
Yes. Every right-thinking government across the world is concerned about corruption and its impacts.
Yes.
Of course, Nigeria being no exception. But the interesting thing, however, is when you have a conversation about corruption on a global scale, it is one thing. Then when it comes to Nigeria, we hear that it is endemic. Help me make sense of that. Why is it endemic corruption in Nigeria?
Yes, it's endemic in the sense that apart from just the public sector corruptions we're talking about, petty corruptions, you know, everywhere there is
in the private sector.
Exactly, there's a gatekeeping in everything you do. You could be surprised that I've had the experience of watching a private sector man trying to bring an investment into a state I don't want to mention, and just to get the government officials to help so that this private sector man could bring this investment was a big problem. And that's why you see the World Bank also measure the competitiveness of the economy, just to see what does it take to register a company. For example, one of those key law, for example, just to have a C of O. If a company, a private sector company like a Chinese company comes to Edo State, what will it take the Chinese company to have a C of O so that they can bring their investment? Because those are indications that shows that the enabling environment is there for the private sector to come in to invest. But once you don't have that enabling environment, there is a huge challenge. And so the endemic nature of corruption in Nigeria makes it impossible in every area to do anything in most of the part of the country. It is endemic because those in authority makes it almost impossible. So in trying to overcome this endemic nature of corruptions in the country, you put in place laws that will make it impossible for gatekeeping. For instance, in Edo State, the access to C of O in Edo State has been liberalized and reformed. It's now easy for you within the specific legal framework, institutional framework, to assess your C of O, because it doesn't make any sense for government not to make the process transparent and accountable, because the government is losing money. Any smart government around the world, just to register your land should be something to be done without necessarily, you don't need to know anybody in government. But this previous before now, it was a complicated process. And this serves as an ambition to private sector investment to the state. So when private sector investors want to take decision on which state to go to invest, they first of all look those things. How endemic corruption is in the state, how transparent the system to assess some basic things in the state. And that's why corruption is very important. So every private sector man, before he or she takes their money to any jurisdiction, any state, he wants to look into what are the anti-corruption framework in place. Are there good governance? When we talk about good governance, it's not an empty phrase, word. It's a word that is loaded, because the governance system of every state is very important. If the governance system is very poor, it has a potential to undermine human capital development in that state. And that's why of recent we're trying to bring out this whole idea, even before election in Edo State, that look, public spending is very important. How government spends their money, it tells you how corrupt the government is. Government that spend more money in infrastructure and human development, like education and ed, tends to be less corrupt. And that's why when you look at the global map, countries that are appearing in the low performance in the corruption perception index, if you look their human development in the index, is very poor. But if you look countries like America, Europe, Canada, and one of the most successful countries like Finland, and you see, these are countries, when you look their corruption perception index is very good. They are the high performance. And when you look their human development index is very high. And then when you look the implication in terms of unemployment or employment and job creation is high. And these are the countries that are performing around the world. So how you spend your public resources is very important. And that's why we are saying that tackling corruption is a fundamental thing. How government spend public money is very important. And what are the framework that you do that? Proceed of crime bill. Putting in place access to information. Because if the public don't have access to information, they will not know what goes on in governance. They will not. And one of the key problems today that is affecting all government across the world is debt. How government manage debt is very important. And what leads to debt? And we have seen that most of the debt are odious debt. I recall more than 25 years ago, we were doing a research across the state. Edo State then was part of the state, then been there. When we review their debt profile, we found that the substantial debt they procured from African Development Bank, the money never just only arrived in it and then returned back to offshore center. Some of this money that you see that government have procured never went for the particular project. If you go to Ikobahi, you see some long pipes in Ikobahi. These were foreign loans that were procured to implement those projects. They were not implemented. The same thing, if you go to Warri, you also see those projects abandoned. And you see how painful it is. It's like future generations have been mortgaged. And that's why corruption is a very serious crime that government must pay attention to. And even citizens trying to elect a government, they should also pay attention to it. Now, what is the role of citizen? Because the most important thing is this conversation.
The people.
What is the role of citizen is very important. How do citizens assess government? Particularly in a patron-client culture like Nigeria. When I say patron-client culture is that, government is, this patronage system. And, when you see the most vocal people in the society.
You often refer to it as rent-seeking. Rent-seeking,
yes. So it's a political economic terms that, to describe this patron-client system. When government is elected, for example, again, I want to use this opportunity to congratulate Governor Obaseki for his re-election. And now, how will the people assess him? Now, for us from the civil society, and I mean the kind of work we do in ANED, is to see what are the big issues that came out from the election. That should be the future. And now, what were the campaign promises of Obaseki? And how will Obaseki implement those promises? Because governance is not just about the governor alone. You require the best brain in the society. Yes. For example, the outcome of the election in Edo State shows clearly that that if you want to get the best in Edo State, you must cut across political party. And in building a framework to design, to respond to the big issue that have emerged from the election. And that's why I was very impressed by how the governor have responded to his victory by reaching out to the opposition. That's very remarkable, because the best idea to move Edo forward is not located in PDP alone. It's not located in APC alone. It's cut across Edo and beyond Edo. As a matter of fact, the brains that drive a society do not reside in the society alone. And if you look around the world today, America is a hotbed for different people coming from around the world.
Right.
If you look countries like Canada, it's not the Canadians alone that are driving the economy of Canada. If you want, for example, and that's one minus about political agenda, when we win an election, we want to be the beneficiary. But how do we manage that? It's about how we bring the best brain, harness the best idea, because the best ideas are located in all spheres of the society. And so corruption is a major problem. And when we talk about corruption, it's not just about stealing public money. The patron-client system, it hampers government to perform. Sometimes I say, sometimes when government don't perform, it's not about the government, it's about the people. How do people respond? And so what are the big issues from Edo elections? What are those issues that was the driver for the voting pattern? And those analysis we are doing now. Why did you think the average people voted for Obaseki? What were those issues? Those issues are having correlation to issue of corruption, because the people feel that they have confidence on Obaseki, and they feel that Obaseki will use public resources to drive development in Edo State. And so what are those issues that are potential that could help take this forward? And by making sure that Obaseki is held accountable to those commitments. And those are the kind of things that help address corruption in a permanent way. You see, that political momentum that led to the re-election of Obaseki can also be put into ensuring that public resources is also spent in a way that you cannot talk about corruption, and you can use that across the country entirely. But that failed at the federal level. When President Buhari was campaigning, one of the key issues that led to the election of
in 2015
was the issue of corruption. But in real sense, let's take NDDC for example. You can see the reason why APC is not performing in the region. The reason why APC is not performing in the region is clear. The APC government has failed the region completely.
But the corruption we've been told about the NDDC, in the NDDC,
yes,
stretches beyond the APC. We understand that
I'm trying to give you an analytical framework what leads to endemic corruption.
Okay.
Why government, you see, when government fails to perform to its commitment, the people will vote out that government.
Because the promises made will become the benchmark.
Exactly. So when Buhari was elected on the basis of his commitment to tackle corruption, but when you come to the region, one of the major intervention agency of Buhari government or federal government is NDDC. NDDC is a cesspit of corruption. The huge billions of naira that is coming to NDDC is going to private pocket under the APC government. And so, just taking a vehicle from Benin, going to Warri, just get to Ologbo, you will shed tears. So the tears that the people are going through, the pain the people are going through, they are responding. As we speak today, the whole entire region is now PDP government.
Before we let you off, there's one more issue I want to drag you into.
Yes.
Quite politely.
Yes.
The issue of plea bargain.
Yes.
Plea bargain became very popular in this country a few years ago.
Yes, it was also politicized.
And then sentiments became divided along the way. I'm asking this question along the line of asset recovery strategy. Plea bargain has come to stay as we know it right now. Is that making any sense? Is it adding value to the fight?
It does make sense. Because as an anti-corruption expert, first, you look for the best, easy way to tackle different corruption, particularly political sector corruption and grant corruption. When you look the amount of investment it takes government to carry out tracing, investigation, it is easier for government to do some negotiations. It helps both the man that have committed the crime and the government agency. Because for every investigation that ESCC is embarking upon, it is taxpayers' money. ESCC is not a charity organization. It's an organization that is funded. And so for every investigation officers takes in ESCC, government is spending money. So, and at the end, and if you look the number of investigation ESCC, ICPC have undertaken in the country, what has been the benefit? So, plea bargaining is not just Nigeria, it's a global practice internationally. Even United States, DOJ, Department of Justice, they use it very well. As a matter of fact, DOJ has secured a lot of resources to the US government. Even banks that are involved in money laundering, who could not follow the compliance very well, in an attempt not to, they are fined, and that attracts a lot of negotiation, and government gets money from that. So plea bargaining is not a bad thing, but if you politicize it, it becomes bad. And that's where the public perceptions of the process is, it takes a negative stereotype. But if the public perceive the government to be honest with the application of plea bargaining in a transparent and accountable way, I can tell you is a better way to follow some grand corruption. It is easier, it's quick, result-oriented, and we are seeing it being used in other jurisdictions around the world, and it has helped. Let me also remind you that in all the major asset recovery that Nigerian government have secured, right from Abacha 1 to Abacha 4 as we speak today, are through negotiation. If you are to follow criminal prosecution, that's another good aspect of the Proceeds of Crime Bill, the non-conviction-based approach of tackling grand corruption through civil forfeiture. You see, the idea is that what is the easiest way to tackle grand corruption? See, the non-conviction-based approach, because if you are to follow the criminal approach, in the criminal approach, you must ensure that you secure the prosecution of whoever that have committed the crime before you can go for the asset. Right. But in the non-conviction-based approach, you don't necessarily have to secure the prosecution of who have committed the crime. You can go after the asset of that person. And that's why the US and the UK government has come with what they call the unexplained wealth order. And even in some section, and that's where another area I see that there are contradictions in the provisions in the ICPC law and this new Proceeds of Crime Bill that gives ICPC the right to go after your asset and through the non-conviction based approach. And then through that process, for example, you live on an income based on an income of 2 million per month, and you stay in a building that was about 30 million. Government anti-corruption agency can go after you. then the burden of proof shift to you.
Okay.
That's one good thing that is coming up. You know, Nigerians don't read. You know, most people don't read before they criticize. This is an innovative provision that is also in the process of crime bill of this agency we are talking about. And if we are to tackle grand corruption in the country, we must adopt the non-conviction based approach, because these political actors are very rich. They are able to use their resources to delay the prosecution and investigation process. But with the non-conviction based approach, you can go after this politician on the basis of the asset they declare. And once you go after the asset they declare, you can say, okay, you were a governor for just 2 tenure or 1 tenure. Now, before you became a governor, this was the asset you had. And after you became a governor, after you finish your tenure, you now have so asset. Can we see it in relation? Does it correlate? The asset you are declaring today, does it correlate with the asset you declare? If it is not, on the basis of non-conviction approach, you don't need to secure the prosecution of the governor. You can go after the asset, either through temporal forfeiture or final forfeiture. And this is what this agency will also be doing. And increasingly, assessing proceeds of crime has increasingly become a source of income. In the face of the challenge of COVID-19 and then declining oil revenue coming to the country, we are looking for an innovative way. So we don't allow any asset to waste.
So you're saying this is a smart move, obviously?
It's a smart move, but we need to look some area where there are contradictions with an existing,
and plug those holes
and remove those contradictions.
Reverend David Golow, I want to say a big thank you for coming to join us on TMI to discuss this very salient issue this morning. Reverend David Golow is Executive Director, African Network for Environment and Economic Justice. It's always a pleasure. Thank you very much for coming. Okay, we're leaving this discussion at this point by 2 more discussions before we tie it up on TMI this very promising Thursday. Stay with me.